It happened so suddenly, I almost thought I had misheard. Mike, my only son, stood in my kitchen that quiet Saturday morning, shrugging as if he had just returned a library book late. He said the Rolex was gone, his father's Rolex, the one watch that had rested on my husband's wrist every morning for nearly 40 years. The same watch I had kissed gently on our wedding day, the same watch that ticked beside me when he held my hand through hospital visits, anniversaries, and Sunday barbecues. To Mike, it was nothing more than a quick sale. I remember the way my stomach dropped. I felt the air leave me as though I had been struck. That watch wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was the last tangible rhythm of my husband's life. When I lost him, I thought at least I would keep the watch ticking in the house. A quiet reminder that his time, our time, had mattered. Now, it was gone, traded away like loose change. Ashley, my daughter-in-law, brushed past me with that polite, brittle smile she wore so well. She mumbled something about how it was for the best, that things like that shouldn't gather dust. I stood there in my own home, clutching the counter as if it might steady the storm rising in my chest. I wanted to scream that they had no right, that this house was still mine, that my grief wasn't theirs to rearrange, but the words caught in my throat. Chicago had been unkindly quiet since my husband's passing. Every evening, I sat by the window, staring out at the streetlights, expecting his voice to call me to dinner. Now, even the silence seemed stolen. I was left with the hollow echo of betrayal from the two people who should have protected my memories, not erased them. Later that evening, unable to sleep, I went through the drawer where the watch box had been, empty, as expected. But then my hand brushed against something odd. The lining of the box felt thicker on one side. I pressed gently, and to my shock, a small compartment slid open. Inside was not the familiar gleam of gold, but a folded slip of paper, creased from age and secrecy. My heart pounded as I held it under the lamp. Numbers. Just a string of numbers written in my husband's tidy hand. Suddenly, the betrayal over the Rolex became something much bigger. Why had my husband hidden this, and why had I only found it now? That was the moment I realized the Rolex wasn't just a keepsake. It was a key. And I was about to unlock a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. The slip of paper burned in my hand all night, those numbers staring at me like unanswered questions. But first, I had to face the pawn shop. I wanted to see the Rolex one last time, maybe even buy it back if I could. It wasn't just about the watch anymore. It was about what my husband might have hidden inside it. The shop sat on the corner of an aging strip in Chicago, its neon sign flickering in and out like a dying heartbeat. When I asked about the Rolex, the man behind the counter barely looked up before telling me it had already been sold. Just like that, the last piece of my husband's daily life was gone. My chest tightened as I tried to hold in the wave of grief and anger. But then something strange happened. The man mentioned, almost offhand, that when they opened the case to inspect the watch, they found a small folded note tucked inside. He didn't think much of it, figured it must have been trash, so he left it in the box. My knees went weak. That was how I'd found the numbers the night before. It wasn't trash. My husband had placed it there deliberately. As I left the shop, my thoughts drifted back to him. He was always meticulous, the kind of man who kept receipts organized by year and labeled every box in the attic. If he had hidden numbers inside the Rolex, they had to mean something. My grief sharpened into unease. What had he been planning? Why hadn't he told me? At home, I laid the paper on the kitchen table, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. A string of digits stared back at me, neat and deliberate. It didn't look like a phone number or a date. My mind raced through possibilities. Bank account A code, a safe deposit box. The more I stared, the more the air around me seemed to thicken. I kept hearing Mike's voice from the other day, so casual, so dismissive. He hadn't asked if the watch meant something to me. He had simply decided it was worth cashing in. Now, I couldn't shake the suspicion that he knew more than he let on. Why sell it so quickly? Why not ask me first? The seed of mistrust began to sprout in my chest, bitter and unwelcome. I pulled out an old notepad and began writing the numbers down in different groupings, trying to see patterns. My husband loved puzzles, crosswords, riddles. He always said life was easier if you learned to look beneath the surface. As the digits shifted in front of me, something clicked. They resembled the structure of a bank routing number. My pulse quickened. Could it be possible? Had my husband tucked away money somewhere I never knew about? And if so, why hide it? Even from me? I pressed the paper flat once more, staring at the code as though it might blink back answers. The grief in my chest mixed with a surge of curiosity that bordered on fear. Whatever this was, it wasn't small. It wasn't accidental. I felt it in my bones. The numbers pointed to something much larger. Something that could change everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my son, and the life I had built. And I had just taken the first step toward uncovering it. I spent the next few days circling those numbers like a predator circling prey. At first, I tried them as phone numbers, dates, even coordinates. Nothing fit. But when I typed them into an online search formatted as a routing number, my chest tightened. The structure matched. It was the kind of sequence tied to international accounts, the kind you only hear about in financial thrillers or whispered scandals. Curiosity pushed me further. With shaking hands, I reached out to our old family lawyer, someone my husband had trusted. I told myself it was just to confirm what I already suspected. But deep down, I knew I was crossing into territory my husband had never wanted me to tread. The lawyer confirmed what I feared and hoped at the same time. The numbers led to a dormant offshore account, one my husband had opened years ago. When he said the balance, I nearly dropped the phone. Almost 3 million. My breath caught, and for a moment, I just sat in silence. How could he have hidden something like this from me? For years, we clipped coupons, postponed vacations, told ourselves we couldn't afford certain things. And all that time, he had a fortune tucked away like some secret life raft. The anger rose first, hot and bitter. Had our entire marriage been a lie? What else hadn't he told me? I felt foolish, blindsided, like the last person to know the truth about my own husband. I thought of the nights I stayed awake worrying about bills, the mornings I fought to stretch his pension. He had watched me struggle, watched me patch together our life with threadbare savings while millions sat untouched. But then, another wave crashed over me, something softer, harder to admit. Awe, maybe even reluctant admiration. My husband had been meticulous, deliberate in everything he did. If he had hidden this money, maybe it wasn't because he didn't trust me. Maybe it was because he wanted to protect me, to shield me from the burden of temptation, or from the greedy hands of others. Perhaps he knew there would come a day when I would need it more than I could ever imagine. I stared out the kitchen window that night, the city lights glimmering faintly in the distance. My heart was torn between betrayal and gratitude, between the pain of secrets and the comfort of provision. The man I thought I knew had left me with both a wound and a lifeline. And as the silence of the house wrapped around me, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe he had always intended for me to find it, not when life was easy, but when I was truly alone, when I needed to remember that he was still protecting me in his own way. It started with gentle suggestions, the kind that sound harmless on the surface. Mike began dropping hints about how much easier my life would be in a retirement community. Ashley chimed in with carefully chosen words about safety and comfort, her tone dripping with practiced sweetness. They framed it as concern, as if I were fragile, incapable of handling the same home I had managed for decades. But beneath their smiles, I felt something sharper, an eagerness they couldn't quite hide. Each time they spoke, I saw the gleam in Ashley's eyes, the one that told me this wasn't about my well-being. It was about what they stood to gain if I handed over control. The house, the money, the legacy my husband and I had built brick by brick, it was all they could see. And the most painful part was watching my own son, the boy I once cradled in my arms, nod along as if it made perfect sense to uproot me from my life. Their words echoed in my head long after they left. I found myself drifting back to the nights when Mike was little, when I worked 2 jobs to make sure he never went to bed hungry. I remembered the afternoons I sat in the bleachers at his baseball games, even when my feet ached from standing on them all day. I thought about the Christmas mornings when I skipped buying new clothes for myself just so he could unwrap the toys he wanted. Every sacrifice had been for him. And now, he stood beside his wife, asking me to give up my independence in exchange for their version of security. The betrayal cut deeper than any stranger's cruelty ever could. It wasn't just about money. It was about how quickly my son seemed willing to erase the woman who had raised him, to reduce me to a burden instead of a mother. I stared at the family photos on my mantle, his graduation, his wedding, and wondered when exactly love had turned into calculation. But as heavy as that heartbreak felt, something inside me began to solidify. I realized that if I didn't take a stand now, everything my husband left behind would be swallowed by their greed. I couldn't undo Mike's choices, but I could make my own. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I whispered a vow to myself. I would not let them push me aside. I would protect the life my husband and I built, and no matter how much it hurt, I would fight for the legacy that was rightfully mine. It started small, barely noticeable moments that might have slipped by if I hadn't already been on edge. Mike began calling more often, his voice too cheerful, his questions too pointed. He asked about my routines, when I usually went to bed, whether I locked the doors at night. At first, I brushed it off as concern, but then Ashley's behavior joined the pattern. She began stopping by unannounced, carrying groceries I hadn't asked for, insisting on checking the mail or tidying up the very rooms I kept spotless. Their presence, once occasional, now pressed in on me daily, and it felt less like love and more like surveillance. I caught Ashley glancing around the house as if taking inventory. Mike lingered near my desk when I paid bills, his eyes flicking toward the checkbook. They thought they were subtle, but the unease in my gut told me otherwise. One afternoon, while they were out of the house, I found myself searching. It felt wrong, like prying into my own son's life, but desperation outweighed guilt. In their guest room, tucked carelessly in a half-open drawer. I found a pile of envelopes, overdue notices, final warnings, credit card statements stacked with numbers that made my heart drop. Thousands upon thousands in debt, spiraling interest, threats of collections. In that moment, everything clicked. Their eagerness for me to move out, their constant hovering, the way Ashley's smile never reached her eyes. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about their drowning finances and the lifeline they thought I represented. My chest tightened with fear as I stared at the proof of their desperation. Debt that size makes people reckless, and reckless people make dangerous choices. I thought back to the way Ashley once joked about uneven sidewalks, her tone too pointed to be innocent. I remembered Mike insisting that a retirement home would take care of me. His words rehearsed, his eyes darting away. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the floorboards made me wonder if I was being watched. Every late-night phone call, muffled behind closed doors, became a possible conspiracy. I caught fragments, phrases about timing and opportunities that left me trembling long after the whispers faded. Fear settled into my bones, but alongside it rose something else: defiance. I would not be easy prey, not even to my own blood. If they were planning something, they would find me harder to corner than they ever imagined. Still, the weight of that discovery pressed on me long into the night. My son and his wife weren't just greedy, they were desperate, and desperation is dangerous. As I lay awake, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the clock, I knew with certainty that the tension had only just begun to build. I decided the only way to truly see their intentions was to play along. So one evening, over dinner, I let my voice waver just enough to sound uncertain. I said maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to think about a retirement community. The effect was immediate. Mike's eyes lit up, and Ashley nearly dropped her fork in excitement. For the first time in weeks, their masks slipped. They tried to cover it with rehearsed concern, talking about safety, convenience, and companionship. But I saw the gleam underneath. It wasn't relief for me, it was anticipation for themselves. I watched them lean in together, speaking in quick bursts, already mentioning tours of facilities and financial logistics. My heart sank, but my resolve hardened. Their eagerness betrayed the truth. This wasn't about caring for me. It was about access, control, and the fortune they suspected I still held. I stayed quiet, nodding at the right moments, letting them believe I was finally yielding. Inside, though, I felt a cold fury building. Every smile, every feigned word of comfort, sounded like nails against glass. The boy I had raised with love and sacrifice was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as an obstacle. Ashley's influence radiated through every word, her tone confident, as though she were already in possession of my home, my accounts, my life. That night, I lay awake in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The house felt different now, like a stage where everyone but me already knew the script. But they underestimated me. I had spent decades teaching high school teenagers, reading their lies in the way they shifted their weight, watching how easily they exposed themselves when they thought no one was paying attention. Mike and Ashley were no different. They thought I was fragile, ready to be tucked away and forgotten. But they were wrong. As their voices echoed in my mind, words about timelines and decisions, I began to map my own plan. I would let them think they were winning, all while preparing my defenses in silence. They believed I was weak, but inside me, a different strength was stirring. I wasn't just going to protect myself. I was going to protect the legacy my husband had hidden so carefully, the life he had entrusted me to safeguard. If this was their game, then I would learn the rules and beat them at their own. That was the night I vowed I would not only survive their schemes, I would outsmart them. And by the time they realized it, it would be far too late. The very next week, I took action. I met with an attorney, someone my husband had once trusted with small estate matters, and I laid everything bare. The secret account, my suspicions, the mounting pressure from my son and his wife. It was humiliating to admit, but necessary. Together, we placed every safeguard we could around my finances. Power of attorney was locked tightly in my name, assets tucked into protective trusts, and my accounts monitored for any suspicious activity. For the first time since finding the numbers in the watch, I felt a measure of safety return. Still, legal papers couldn't shield me from the ache in my heart. The harder part was facing Mike. I didn't want a screaming match. Anger would only feed his defenses. Instead, I spoke quietly, firmly, the way I used to when he was a boy who had lost his way. I told him I knew about the debts. I told him I could see through the smiles and the retirement home brochures. For a moment, he dropped the act. His shoulders sagged. His eyes flickered with guilt. But then the defensiveness returned. Standing there, looking at the man my son had become, I felt two truths collide inside me. One was grief, the grief of realizing he could betray me, of knowing the boy I raised no longer existed in the same way. The other was clarity. I couldn't change his choices, but I could protect myself from them. Walking away from that conversation, I felt lighter, though my heart carried its bruises. Protecting myself didn't mean I loved him any less. It meant I finally loved myself enough to stop letting others decide my fate. Perhaps that was what my husband intended when he tucked those numbers inside the watch. Not just money, but a message: be strong, be wise, and don't let anyone take what is rightfully yours. As I locked the papers away in a safe, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't weak or defeated. She was older, yes, scarred by betrayal, but she was also unshakable. My son had taken pieces of my trust, but he hadn't broken me. If anything, he had forced me to find a strength I never realized I had.
And that strength was mine to carry forward.
Looking back now, it almost feels like a story that happened to someone else. The Rolex, the hidden numbers, the fortune I never expected to find. None of it was just about money. It was about what money reveals, about the cracks it exposes in the people we love. I never imagined my own son would see me not as his mother, but as a problem standing between him and his escape from debt. That betrayal still aches, but it also taught me a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. I realized that resilience doesn't come from comfort. It comes from being tested. Losing my husband left me broken in ways I can't put into words, and discovering his secret account brought a flood of emotions I'm still sorting through. Anger, grief, awe, even gratitude. But in the end, what mattered wasn't just the money he left behind. It was the reminder that I still had choices, that I wasn't powerless, even when those closest to me wanted me to believe otherwise. It's bittersweet, isn't it, to see how quickly people can change when money enters the picture? To watch love blur into greed and loyalty crumble under the weight of desperation. Yet at the same time, it made me stronger. I protected myself, my home, and the legacy my husband entrusted me with. And maybe that was his final gift to me, not just security, but the strength to claim my own worth. If you take anything from my story, I hope it's this: money doesn't change who people are. It reveals them. And when betrayal comes, as painful as it is, it can also light the path to your own resilience. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever faced something similar, betrayal, hidden truths, or the complicated ties of family, I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this reminder of strength. Because at the end of the day, our stories matter. And sometimes, telling them is how we reclaim our power.